So here we are with the Black Box HGQ from Brainworks Plugin Alliance and Native Instruments. This comes off the sort of history of the black box saturating processor and hardware. And this is a new hardware unit that's been emulated by Brainworks, and it's also a saturator, but it's an EQ as well, and the two are working with each other. And I have to say, what makes this really great is the sound. It's got some unique features to it, but it's an EQ saturator where you get saturation on each EQ band. You know, there are other devices out there that do this, but this one, the reason that I'm reviewing is it just sounds great. I'm a big fan of the black box as a saturator. I would say this sounds a lot different in its saturation, but it's equally good. What I like about this in particular is it adds density and it adds smoothness. So you can really bring density into the low end with it, or mid-range. And the top end, you can really add a nice smooth sheen to it. It's just great at that, at all of those things. So I'm going to go over the controls, and I'm going to give you some audio examples in different contexts. To start with, I'm going to just give you a bit of a playthrough on the mix bus and just show you what it can do. I'm going to go into the details of how this works after I give you a bit of an audio example. But before we get started, if you can like the video, just press the like button and subscribe. That really helps. And if you can press the thanks button, that really helps the channel keep going, and is greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'm going to play through a section of a track with this on the mix bus and bring it in and out just so you can hear what it can do in terms of what I would say is to listen for is the density and punch on the low end, and the 3D width it gives the mix, and the openness, it opens it out. And what I've done here is nothing hugely unusual. I've done the kind of things you'd normally probably do with an EQ, but this is doing a lot more than you'd get with a straight ahead EQ, obviously. So just briefly, I've boosted in the 50K area, and I've saturated in that area as well. And I'll go over all these controls, but just so you know roughly what I've done, and then done a cut in a 300, 330 area here, and I've done a boost in the high end, but on the sides. There's a little bit of a boost in the mids, but mainly I've boosted it on the sides. And yes, this is very much an MS unit using a shelf, and saturated it quite a lot as well. So there's quite a bit of saturation going on the low end and even more in the high end, and some boosts and cuts, just so you know what it is. So I'm going to start with it out, and then I'll bring it in. So you can hear, obviously, the EQing I've done, but beyond that, there's a lot of solidity and weight added to the low end, and it's punchy down in the low end, and it opens the mix out nicely in the mids, So that kind of boxiness of the mids disappears. Now that's probably just because I've done a cut, and to some degree that would happen just by EQing that. But it's just done a very nice job of kind of opening it out in a way that a straight ahead EQ wouldn't do. And the top end is just widened and made lush, very lush and nice. If you listen to the cymbals with it in and out, there's this really lush sheen going on with the cymbals, because the cymbals are kind of going away the whole time, and it's nice to have, I think it's something like that, a really kind of lush, smooth sheen to all of that. I'm just going to have a bit of a fiddle with it, moving around the controls, just so you can hear a little bit of the variety of what it can do. So there I boosted basically, mid-range highs and lows, as you can see down here. And it's just got such a smooth, rich sound to all three frequency areas. I'm adding a lot of saturation here, more than I probably would do, but it still sounded really smooth. And a fair amount of saturation in the mid-range, and again, it sounded just really smooth. This is not like a distortion box where you're going to hear like it's breaking up into distortion. It's like a density, smoothness type of saturation. There are these alt buttons, which I'm going to go the whole thing in a minute, which do make it somewhat more aggressive, but it's still in that sort of subtle area. And what it's really good at is just bringing out the tonal density hidden. In other words, the areas of the tone that's in the music anyway, but that it can bring to the forefront. That's what this saturation is good at. And if you look at it on Plugin Doctor, it's complex saturation, complex sets of harmonics which change a lot when you sweep through this frequency area. Those harmonic patterns change a lot. And when you move any of these controls on any of the bands, all of the harmonics change a lot. So it's complex. It's not as straightforward just adding a simple harmonic pattern by any stretch of imagination. It's one of the more complex ones I've seen. I tend to look at all these things in Plugin Doctor and mess about and see how they change when you change the input level, and what happens when you sweep the frequency around. And this one is reacting very complexly to the input signals, which is what you'd kind of hope for in something that's emulating analog gear, or creating something, even if it's not emulating analog gear, in the digital domain that's going to give us that kind of interest and complexity that we're looking for in music. Something that reacts in a rich and nice way to the input signal as it changes. So let's move over to guitar now. So I'm just going to move to guitar solo here and show you what I've done here. So I'm going to start with this out and bring it in. And really what I'm doing here, as you can see, I'm just adding saturation to the mid. So I boosted and cut at the same frequency so that the resulting curve in white here is roughly flat. But I've added loads of saturation, and I've added this extra slightly more aggressive saturation algorithm, and to me it just brings out a very nice tone in the guitar that again I'd never get with a kind of normal EQ, and the saturation on this is just really working nicely with the natural tone of the guitar. So let's have a listen to this out and then I'll bring it in. So I thought that worked really nicely as a saturation, adding saturation to those mid-range without it sounding like, you know, more fuzz on the guitar, because it already has its own, you know, distortion element there. So that was nice. I, again, rarely find an EQ saturation thing that I like putting on that particular guitar sound, which is my guitar sound, it's my guitar playing. I rarely add EQ to it because I almost always find it takes away rather than adds to the sound, but I found that really sounded really nice and rich. I mean, adding saturation to it, not EQ. I don't tend to add EQ to it as well, but you know, I've tried lots of saturation, even frequency specific saturation like that, and not liked it, and that one I really like that. Works really well. So I'm going to go through the controls now. I'm not going to go through this totally exhaustively, but I'm going to go through the basic controls. So you've got 3 bands here, which are duplicated over here. And basically you can have these connected together with this link button press, and if I move this one, you can see it moves on the other side, or I can disconnect them and have them separate. And if you've got it in MS mode, of course, that can be really useful because you can do things differently on the mid and the side. For now, I'm going to just keep them linked. Starting at the top here, you've got saturation, it's the amount of saturation. However, it's worth noting that this doesn't start to work until you boost a little bit. And then it starts to saturate. Even if you just move this 1 notch, it starts to saturate. With this down, it does have a little bit of saturation, but this doesn't actually do anything as you turn it up. It's only when you've moved this up at least 1 that it starts to actually add more saturation. And as I move this up, it interacts with this, and the type of saturation, the saturation pattern changes and the amount changes, and these two very much interact with each other. Now, if I wanted to saturate just one area without boosting it, you can do that. And the way you do that is to make a cut at the same frequency. So if I make a cut, you can see I've boosted it here. If I now cut, so that that curve, the white, the blue is the boost, the red is the cut, and the white is the resulting result, and it gets pretty flat, not completely flat, but fairly flat. So now I've got a cut and a boost that kind of, not exactly, but kind of cancel each other out enough, and then I can boost this, and you can see within that blue it starts to shade in as I turn this up, and that's showing the amount of saturation occurring within that band. So I can saturate a lot without boosting that frequency like an EQ. Now you've also got Q, which is pretty straightforward, and that works on the boost or the cut slightly differently, as you can see. Again, via the hardware, move it all the way to the left, it turns into a shelf. Now again, these are all connected together, so they're working together, but you don't have to have them work together. So if I click on any of these, and I'll say I click on the low, you see it flashes. Now it's independent and I can move it, so I can do a Pultec thing if I want, by boosting and cutting at a similar but not exactly the same frequency. These move completely independently now. If I click again on it, it reconnects them, so they move together. And it's the same with the Q. You can move them independently. You see they're independently moving, or I can put them together and they move together. And so, yeah, it's very flexible once you get the hang of doing it that way. And I think it's quite neat once you get the idea, because otherwise you'd have a lot more switches. And there's enough going on, I think. So I think it was quite a nice idea to do it that way, as long as you've kind of pick that up reading a manual or watching a tutorial like this. So yeah, you've got the low and mid and high. They cover somewhat different frequency areas, though they do overlap, which is also useful. Again, with the high frequency, it turns into a shelf, kind of. It says shelf. As you can see, it curves down. It's not like a pure shelf, but it's as good as. It acts pretty much like a shelf. It's a nice curve as you move to these high frequencies. You get a really nice slope coming down here, or you can get very precise with it. Okay, so what else have we got here? We've also got a parallel or series architecture. Now that's interesting because that does change things. Look here that I've got a cut, particularly when you get a cut and a boost at the same time. If you look at this cut and boost happening, I've got a cut and a boost. Oops, I've got a cut and a boost happening. Let's switch this back on here. Roughly in the same area. When I put it in parallel, it's different. That boost is happening more. So you get a different effect, and when you start getting complex sets of boosts and cuts going on, two things you'll notice. One is that they interact with each other more than you might expect, more than you'd get with a straight ahead digital EQ. Sometimes you'll get a situation, especially with the Q, where you get quite strong interactions with one band and another, like one band will affect another band in certain circumstances. And when you go to parallel, you're going to get further changes happening, and the interactions will change as well. And, you know, this helps you see that. So that's useful to know. And I like the fact you can hide that. You know, you can hide having that if you just want to do it by ear. I quite like seeing what's going on when you've got complex stuff going on. I quite like seeing what's happening personally, but you can minimize this right down if you like, and then you get, I'm not going to go over how that works because I'm never going to use it like that. For me, I like to see it all and work that way. Auto listen, soloing per band, all really good. You can double the amount of boost you get here if you like. And then you've got a high and low pass filter, useful to have, and an attenuation. So you can, as you're boosting these things, obviously you're going to, where the saturation goes up, you're going to start boosting the level, and you can level match that with this. I know this is following the hardware. I would really, the one thing I'd like to see on this EQ, and I don't really, having used it for a little bit, I really don't have many criticisms. I think it sounds fantastic, and it's just really great, a tool. But I wish this was not ganged, and I wish it went a little bit further. I like to level match really precisely, and sometimes, you know, it's somewhere in between these. And sometimes if I'm boosting a lot, this doesn't quite go far enough to level match. So I'd like to see a change in that. Get rid of the, you know, the indented stop so you can't go in between. I don't think there's a way of going in between those. If I'm wrong and somebody knows, then let me know in the comment. As far as I could tell, there isn't a way. But yeah, that would be good. They also put headroom controls into some of their plugins, plugin alliance, and this doesn't have that, and it would also be quite nice to have a headroom control. I don't think it's that necessary. You can just look at you can drive it with another plugin, and you can look at the meters here, but it's kind of quite nice to be able to, you know, have a couple of knobs up here like they often do have to change the input level and output level. But those are very minor changes I would love to see. But apart from that, it's for the most part, it's just great and has everything I'd want to see in it. So let's have a look now at some individual channels. I'm going to go over to the bass and have a listen to that. So on the bass, I've done this, and I'll just bring it in and out. I'll solo the bass and bring it in and out. This bass is a kind of stick type bass with the tapping, so there's got a lot of high-end energy on it. It's not actually a stick bass, but it's that same design. And I found I was able to really make it sit more powerfully in the mix with this in a way that I couldn't do with straight ahead EQ or just adding straight ahead saturation to it. So I'll start with it out soloed, and you can hear what I've done to it, and I'll bring it in a minute. So I've added a lot there. I've pulled away some. I've boosted in that mid-range so that that comes forward more, but also cut a bit because I didn't want so much of that really high frequency energy when I boosted. And I boosted in the low end here, and I've saturated it quite a bit. Now let's hear this in the mix and see what that's like, because you really can't tell soloed, and I'd never do something like this in solo, but just so you could hear it more closely. So start with it out and then bring it in. So for me, that really gives the bass some weight and solidity, and it just pulls it together with the drums nicely. It just makes it more present and in a kind of really, a solid way with the drums. So I really like that effect. And I often don't like EQing bass much, because I tend to find that most EQs, certainly digital EQs, straight ahead EQs, and most EQs, I rarely like what they do to an electric bass. Acoustic bass often needs some EQing to get it to cut through a mix, but with electric, I tend not to EQ it much, and I tend to use compression as a way of shaping the tone more. Sometimes I'll EQ it if there's a problem to remove the problem, but the idea of boosting, maybe in the upper mids I do sometimes. In the lows I rarely do, because I tend to find it just makes it sound kind of boomy. And this doesn't do that. This just gives it that really solid extra low end that I normally would shy away from boosting, because I'd normally find it would just boom. And this really doesn't do that. And I suspect it's the saturation that is keeping that, holding that density together nicely. So let's move over to drums. Let's start with snare. So listen to the snare without and with. I'm going to keep this in context of the rest of the drum kit, because there's a lot being added in by the overheads and so forth. So I'm just going to solo the drums, and then I'm going to bring, this is just on the snare though, I'm going to bring this, start with it out and bring it in. So in context, so I think it's too much top end. I've added on there. It didn't really need it, but just to show you what it can do, I've added quite a bit low, pulled out the mids, added some top end there. And in fact, I'm going to move over to the drum solo here, because I think here, one of the things that I liked about it is that it really brings out those ghost notes. A drummer like this, there's so much going on the snare that are just really quiet, intricate things going on. So have a listen with this in and out with the ghost notes in the drum solo. So you can hear that detail more. And what that saturation does is it brings out that detail. I mean, this is a great plugin. I give it a huge thumbs up. It sounds great. And it just, for me, it just produces results quickly. And in a busy mixing schedule, that is really important, to just get great results quickly and get that kind of, you know, you're always looking for is that kind of solidity on the low end and that sheen on the top end. And it's just instantly there with this. And also great on, you know, on single instruments, as I showed. Fantastic. So highly recommended. And yeah, hope you found this useful. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you can, press the thanks button, and that helps the channel keep going. It's greatly appreciated, and hope to see you next time.